I was 22 when this happened. At the time, I had just graduated college. I was between jobs and doing odd work around my small town. Babysitting, cleaning houses, running errands, basically anything that paid cash. A woman I'd dog sat for in the past recommended me to a friend of her neighbor's, a man named Craig. He called me one afternoon and explained he'd be traveling for a week and he would need someone to stay in his house to look after his golden retriever, Max. He told me Max was an anxious dog, so he tended to do better when someone would stay with him overnight, rather than come back and forth just to feed and walk him. The pay was really good, and I agreed. I met Craig 2 days later. He was in his late 40s, tall, wearing wire rim glasses and a windbreaker. Nothing about him seemed strange at first. He was a little overly friendly, but not creepy. His house was on the edge of town, tucked back in a wooded area. The place itself was nice but dated, with beige carpets and floral curtains. Craig walked me through everything, how often to let the dog out, where the spare key was, and what fridge items I could use. He told me I could stay in the guest room, which was right off the living room on the first floor. I started the job on a Monday. I watched a lot of TV and took Max on his walks, and then I would sleep in the guest room with him curled up at the foot of the bed. It was the third night when things went wrong. I had been sitting on the bed scrolling through my phone when I noticed something odd. On the dresser across from the bed, next to a small lamp, there was a digital alarm clock. I remember thinking it didn't match the rest of the room. It was new looking, black plastic with a bright blue display, and everything else in the room looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. Maybe it was the way the light from the lamp hit the front of it, but something made me look closer. I noticed a small, perfectly round pinhole above the numbers. At first, I thought it was just a sensor, but then I realized with the angle, the tiny hole was pointed directly at the bed. My stomach dropped. I had heard stories about hidden cameras in alarm clocks before, but I'd never actually seen one in person. I picked it up, and it was heavier than I expected. From the inside, I could barely hear a faint buzzing sound, like a tiny fan was running. I turned it towards my face and stared right into the pinhole. That was when Max, who had been lying by the door, suddenly lifted his head and started whining. From somewhere else in the house, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door closing. Every hair on my body stood up. Craig wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday, and it was only Wednesday night. I froze there, holding the clock in my hands, and then I heard slow footsteps on the hallway carpet. I set the clock back down and moved to the door, locking it just as the steps stopped outside. Then I heard a voice, calm but slightly out of breath. It was Craig. He said he had left something behind in the room and needed me to open the door. I couldn't think of what to say, and a moment later, he said it wasn't what I was thinking, that it was just a motion sensor for the dog, so he didn't think to mention it. He told me to come out so we could talk like adults. And as I backed away from the door, his knocking turned into pounding. Then Max started barking, and that only seemed to make Craig more agitated. I glanced over at the window, It was low enough to climb out. But my hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 times to unlock it. Behind me, Craig was still pounding on the door. He said if I didn't open up, he would get the key and come in, and call the cops and tell them I broke into his house. I didn't wait to hear more. I shoved myself through the open window and dropped onto the grass outside. Max scrambled after me, his nails clicking against the window ledge, but he didn't jump out. I sprinted through the side yard and down the gravel driveway until I reached the road. My phone was in my pocket. I called my mom, who lived 15 minutes away, and begged her to come get me. When she pulled up, I was hiding behind a cluster of mailboxes. From that spot, you couldn't see Craig's house at all. I blocked Craig's number, and I stayed at my mom's house for the night. The next morning, I called a lawyer, who said that without physical proof, like the recording from the camera or even the device itself, there wasn't much we could do. Even if the clock did have a hidden camera on it, Craig could still possibly explain it away as a motion sensor or something like that. It would likely come down to my word against his. I suggested that I go back and take a picture, but my lawyer strongly advised against returning alone. And the thought of seeing Craig again just made my skin crawl. So nothing ever happened to him. I never got paid for the 3 nights that I stayed there. The woman who had recommended me stopped responding to my messages, so I never even found out if she had a clue about him. Now I check every clock, smoke detector, and picture frame wherever I am, even in my own apartment. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about waking up to see a camera lens watching me from across the room. And I still see that little black lens staring back at me, and hear the sound of the door closing somewhere deep in the house that I thought was empty. It makes me wonder if he had been there the whole time, watching me through that camera. A year later, I had been traveling for a weekend music festival with a group of friends. We were on a budget, so instead of a hotel, we rented an Airbnb about 30 minutes outside of the city. On the listing, the house looked fine. Nothing fancy, just a simple 1-story ranch home with wood paneling and dated furniture. The host, a woman named Deborah, had a verified profile with good reviews. That first night, we got back late after the show and ordered pizza. I shared one of the bedrooms with my best friend, and everything was normal. On the second night, when we got back from the festival around midnight, the front door was unlocked. We were fairly certain that none of us had left it that way, but we still brushed it off. Then the next morning, my friend noticed that her backpack had been moved. She had kept it zipped up by the bed, but now it was on the chair across the room, partially open, and she swore she hadn't touched it. Later that day, when everyone else went out to lunch, I stayed behind because I wasn't feeling well. I laid on the couch in the living room, and that was when I heard the faint creak of a door down the hallway. I sat up, listening. I wondered if I had been in that space between asleep and awake, and I was hearing the noise from my memories. But then I heard another noise in the house, Someone was inside. I started creeping down the hall toward the noise. At the very end of the hallway was a narrow door that had been locked. We figured it was a closet. But now, the knob was slightly turned. I grabbed my phone and texted my friends to come back immediately. They pulled up 10 minutes later and we all searched the house together. But that narrow door was once again locked tight. We messaged the host about it, and she said it was a utility closet that got stuck sometimes. But we didn't believe her, so we cut our trip short and left that day. After we got home, I was curious about the Airbnb listing, but when I went to check it, it was gone. The account for Deborah had disappeared too. To this day, I don't know who or what was behind that locked door. But the scariest experience I had wasn't in a strange place or with a stranger. It was with someone I thought I knew. After college, I lived with a roommate named Jenna. We split the rent and responsibilities and would occasionally hang out. We weren't best friends, but we got along well enough. But after 6 months, Jenna started acting off. She stopped going to work as much, claiming she felt sick. She would just stay in her room all day with the door shut. At night, I would sometimes hear her pacing around the hallway. I asked if she was okay. After a few times, I got up, opened my bedroom door, and she was just standing in the dark. I asked if she was okay, and without an answer, she walked back to her room and shut the door. Then I started noticing little things missing from my bedroom. My necklace, some socks, things I figured I misplaced at first. But then, one morning, I left my room and saw my necklace on the counter. Jenna was sitting there eating cereal. And with a smile, she told me, "You left this out." But I knew I hadn't. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. Through the thin crack, I could see Jenna's eyes staring at me. She just lingered there, motionless, watching me. I screamed at her, and she slammed the door shut. The next day, she acted like nothing had happened. But I know it wasn't just a dream. And I can't shake the piercing image of her eye glaring at me through the crack in the door. By the next week, I found another place to stay. I waited until she went to work for once and moved everything out before she got back. We never spoke again. A few months later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance who told me Jenna had been evicted from that apartment. Apparently, the landlord found dozens of random items she had stolen from neighbors. Things like their mail, shoes they had left in the hallway, and even a set of spare keys. That was when I realized that things could have gotten so much worse if I hadn't trusted my gut and left when I did.